Ron Busby is the president and CEO of the U.S. Black Chambers, where he advocates for the economic empowerment of the black community. He's a former business owner himself. He's a very successful former business owner. And so this is a topic he knows well. Ron, it's great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us. You know, as we talk about this, and right now we're in a time where the tensions in the nation, inequality, COVID, the economic stress that I think is still very much out there, but also the divides about opportunity and race are out there. And so when we think about this, and I try every single time when we're discussing business, is to sort of what do we need to dismantle from our past to get the future right? And how, and you know, as you're dealing with, you know, businesses, black businesses, the Black Chamber, what do you need to help the constituency you're responding to succeed?
Great question, and I appreciate the dialogue as well as the opportunity to discuss the concerns as well as the solutions, as was discussed before, for Black-owned businesses. And I say that because so often we have the title of diversity and inclusion, minority programs. What we have seen and heard from our members across the country is intentionality. We need to see and hear and read the words Black and or African American in the solutions. We have seen, even in the previous legislation, the words Black or African American never listed there. The words minority and underserved were there, but it did not specify the needs of Black-owned businesses. Our community was hit the hardest. 46,000 African Americans lost their lives due to COVID. We lost 441,000 businesses due to COVID. We also lost many of the businesses in our communities that had employees as well as customers and contracts that were lost. What we're looking for going forward is a couple of things. Transparency. When we looked at where payroll protection plan and other of the stimulus dollars were going, they didn't hit the Black community. And our concern is that when we leave it as a broad brush of how we're going to address minority communities, many times Black communities get left out of that equation. So for us, there needs to be accountability. We know that, and I'm glad to see that Wells Fargo is sponsoring this conversation. We want to make sure that not just the CDFIs have access to the businesses that need that relationship, but many of our businesses continue and will, even after this, bank with larger banks. They'll continue to bank with the Bay of A's and the Wells Fargos. So we want to make sure that they have accountability to ensure that businesses have access to the funds, but most importantly, Black-owned businesses have access to the funds that they need. 47% of the businesses that still remain in existence for Black businesses are saying that if they don't get funding, additional funding in the next 60 days, they too are looking at having to close their doors. And then next, as those businesses have gone out of business, we're talking a lot about a payroll protection plan that is geared towards businesses that have employees. Black businesses own and operate 2.6 million Black-owned businesses across the country. But of the 2.6 million, 2.5 million have no employees. As we say, they're not mom and pops, they're mom or pops. And so when you create a program that is there to ensure that the employee is taken care of and not the employer, you leave the Black business community totally out of the loop. And so we've got to ensure that it's based on need and not based on employee base, because many of our firms do have contractors, 1099, family members, or cash and carry type businesses that were not allowed to participate in the stimulus package, and many of our businesses suffer, and we want to make sure that going forward, that is not going to be a barrier as well.
Ron, that's very powerful, and I know you are right about the employees. Even when I was talking to the congressman a moment ago, you know, about the level of, you know, the employee size, you know, he was saying, well, we went, you know, from 500 employees, the minimum, to 300. I'm like, well, what about 10? What about 2? What about, as you said, what about 1? Because in a gig economy where you've got sort of fluid opportunities and people chasing it, or a lot of people have put together multiple gig jobs, you know, to kind of hold it together. And many of them are businesses. You know, I interviewed Ahmad Bhutani, the CEO of GoDaddy, and, you know, looking at micro ventures that people are, you know, what we would call side hustles that become businesses. Some of them grow, but they are small. And I guess I just sort of feel like we don't talk about that enough. Those are legitimate businesses. They're organized under the IRS as businesses. Are you finding any I mean, because I look at this as a marketing problem, a marketing challenge, as well as a conceptual one. Are you finding any allies as you talk about this in that way? Because I find it very compelling. I'm with you. But who are the other allies you've moved?
Well, some of our corporate partners have really stepped up and heard our cry. I think the Black community really suffered from a three-prong or a trifecta. It was the virus itself, and again, we lost 46,000 Black lives. It was the stimulus package where we lost 400 and almost 50,000 Black-owned businesses, and then we saw the murder of George Floyd. And when you put all of those together, our community has suffered. But at the same time, many of our corporate partners stepped up. There's numbers around the $66 billion or $6 billion commitment made. But again, transparency and accountability. So many of the corporations have stepped up and said, yes, how can they support? How can they make sure that we don't lose those Black-owned businesses? But we've got to make sure that we can actually find out where those dollars are going. We know that in America, between 1950 and 2020, we've saw very little, if any, decrease in the wealth gap between white families and Black families. And when that continues to happen, as it was discussed before, this is not going to be the last pandemic or scare. And so for us, we've got to make sure that we get this one right. We're looking at asking for an additional stimulus package in the very near future during the first quarter. And we're asking for a 3% set aside just for Black-owned businesses, roughly a $10 billion number of the $650 billion. But we have demonstrated that we could save nearly 500,000 jobs with that kind of support. And so many of our corporations are hearing our cry, are stepping up. And so our partners have really been there to kind of fill in the gap between where the federal government had not had the opportunity to support many of the micro businesses and Black-owned businesses particularly.
Ron, I'm going to look forward to having you back many more times and talking with you because you're doing it. A friend of mine is the president of the U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, and you've raised a very interesting question, which I think is a delicate and fragile one, but I'm just going to ask you, are there times where the so-called Black and brown community can be partnered and work together as opposed to just the times you've said, hey, we also need to see, Black businesses written into this? I mean, are there times you work together and times when you walk alone?
Oh, very much so. The U.S. Hispanic Chamber, the U.S. Pan-Asian Chamber, the U.S. Gay and Lesbian Chamber, as well as the U.S. Black Chamber, we all work together. And the great thing about it is we all have similarity concerns. So often, though, they try to pin us against each other. And we've come together over the last few years and said many of our concerns are similar. This month, it may be a Black issue. Last month, it may have been a Hispanic issue. But when we do know that when we come together collectively, our voices, our concerns are amplified, and we have an opportunity to get more listeners and get more accomplished. What I don't want America to really understand, or what I want America to understand is there's no Black and brown issue. There are Black issues and there are brown issues. And we need to make sure that we're intentional. I'm not trying to take anything away from the Hispanic community or any other communities. But when we look at who had the biggest loss, the Black community suffered at 41%, almost twice the rate of any other ethnic community. And so at this point in time, I'm speaking on behalf of our businesses saying we need twice the support of any other ethnic group. But yes, we come together. I'm very pleased to partner with many of our ethnic chambers and other nonprofit organizations around the country, because as we all grow together, we all do better. The one thing that all of our businesses say is we're looking for additional customers. And so when the Hispanic community has additional customers, they continue to shop and support Black-owned businesses as well.
Well, Ron Busby, President and CEO of U.S. Black Chambers, is a pleasure. I hope you'll come back. I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.